Hello everyone, thanks for coming along on this Monday evening, bit damp where I am. So I'm here to talk about Avid Pro Tools from a audio post-production perspective and from a podcasting perspective. I'm not really a music expert, so I don't have lots of that to teach you about today, but what I'm hoping to do is to be able to get you up and running, making a podcast, editing a package for a radio piece, all that sort of stuff. So basic stuff. It won't get too complicated. Well, it will get quite complicated, but you should be able to manage everything that's here. So what we're going to cover today, we're going to cover what Pro Tools is, how you need to set it up to get going, the additional little bits and bobs that you need to install to make it get going. I'm going to teach you basic editing, importing, recording, layering streams, so making a little multi-track mix, and then how to get it out of the project at the other end so that you've got a file that you can upload and post as your podcast or whatever else. Okay, so to start off a little bit about me first, my name is David Thomas, as I've said. I joined the BBC in 1987, so yes, I am old. And I've been using Pro Tools since 1994. So I've been using Pro Tools for, 27 years or something like that. So quite a long time. All my Pro Tools use, I'll say up front, has been on a Mac. So I'm a bit rusty with some of my Windows shortcuts, but I've been doing lots of revision like a very good boy today. So I think I've got the basics of my Windows shortcuts sorted. But apologies if there's an occasional error. Usually you will find that if you use the command key on a Mac, then it's a control key is the equivalent on Windows. I will try and keep Windows brain going as well, and we'll see how we go with that. Right, so let's start at the beginning. I'm going to share my screen, and we'll start with 3 or so little slides just so I can talk you through some of the basics of Pro Tools and how you get it installed and up and running. So if I share my screen here, and then I start that. So this is, as it says cleverly on the page, Introduction to Pro Tools. So there are 3 main types of Pro Tools. There's Pro Tools First, then there's Standard Pro Tools, and then there's Pro Tools Ultimate. So Pro Tools First is a good way of starting. It's free. You still have to install a few bits and bobs, so it's a little bit tricky to get up and running. They all are. Once they're up and running, they kind of run themselves, and I actually find them pretty reliable, pretty robust. People talk a lot about Pro Tools crashing, but it's not something that I experience regularly. In fact, it's very, very irregular at this point. So as you can tell from the slide here, Pro Tools First is free. You have limited tracks. I think you're limited to 16 tracks. So that'll be, I think, 8. I think it works that that's 8 stereos, 16 monos. I think it's something like that. They've improved it an awful lot over the years. Even up to a couple of years ago, you used to have to store everything in the cloud and you were limited to 3 projects. But I think they probably found that was putting people off rather than encouraging them into the world of Pro Tools. So they've opened it up and made it a lot more accessible to people. So if you've experimented with Pro Tools free for a while, the next obvious upgrade is to go to the Standard Pro Tools. Now, Pro Tools is what Pro Tools Standard is what most people consider to be Pro Tools. So if you go to almost any radio studio or any producer at home, they will generally have the Standard Pro Tools, the one in the middle here. So I've put it £25 to £29 a month. So £29 a month as if you buy it on a month-to-month basis. But it's £25 a month if you buy a year up front. You do have the sting of the initial purchase price. So, sorry, no, that's a different thing. The alternative is, let me go back here, the £25 or £29 a month. Once you stop paying, it stops working. If you pay £420, you buy it, and it'll work as long as you maintain compatibility with your computer. If you want to maintain upgrades and a support package, then that's £199 a year. Otherwise, the £420 you spend now, you'd get version 2021.3, I think. That would continue running without any further payments until that stops being compatible with your computer. But if you want to maintain that compatibility, it's £199 a year every year beyond that. And then if you're in with the big boys, Pro Tools Ultimate, that is £2,250 thereabouts. With all these prices, you can get deals in various places. I don't really know how it benefits people to have uneven prices. I would have thought that Avid would just say, buy it from us and that is the price. But you do get deals. Different companies do different deals at different times. But generally speaking, Pro Tools Ultimate is then about £2,250 to buy up front, and then £399 a year after that. So I would say that that's really overkill for most people, unless you're working in surround, i.e. big studios or people that are making movies and things like that. Or if you have some Avid specific cards to add functionality and things like that. So there's a card called an Avid native card, or there's things called HDX cards, which give you faster performance. Generally, it gives you things that are much more useful in a super professional environment. You won't encounter Pro Tools Ultimate very often unless you are working in surround and things like that. Okay, so let's assume that you've bought or downloaded your Pro Tools software. You also need a little piece of software from a company called iLok. So for years and years and years, Avid, the company who makers of Pro Tools, have worked with this company called Pace, which make iLok, and they make security systems. You might be surprised to learn how much software is not paid for. People will download cracks on the internet and things like that. I strongly advise against doing this. I know it happens, but people earn their living from it, and it generally does make companies go bust if you don't pay for it. So I would always recommend paying for your software. Makes it more reliable as well, and you're not going to get nasty viruses. So if you buy your Pro Tools, then you also need iLok. So an iLok is a dongle. It looks like a USB memory stick, but it's not. All it does is it stores licenses for Pro Tools on it. So an easier way of explaining that is if you imagine that iLok has a big yes-no switch on it. If you've bought Pro Tools and iLok knows you've bought Pro Tools, then it will have a yes within the switch. Otherwise, it will have a no. So Pro Tools, the software, you can download and install fairly, if you can get your hands on it, it'll install without any serial numbers or anything like that. But it won't run unless you've got the yes-no switch to yes. And one way or another, it's always iLok that controls that yes-no switch. So there's two versions of iLok. One is a physical key, USB key, as in the right-hand picture at the top here. Available as a USB-A shape or a USB-C shape these days. To buy one of those is about £38, and you can buy that wherever you want, from any audio dealer or music shop usually. And then there's another option called iLok Cloud. And iLok Cloud basically licenses your computer. So the yes-no switch lives in your computer. So if you've got two computers, it gets a bit tricky. So if you've got a desktop and a laptop, so you would have to be disabling your main computer and then re-enabling your laptop. So if you're working with a desktop and a laptop or multiple computers, or you're likely to be going to various buildings and using various people's Pro Tools software, then it's probably worth getting a physical iLok. Okay, so you download the software at this page, which is ilok.com, and you can see either Mac OS X or Windows 32 or 64-bit downloads are available. Once you've bought your your Pro Tools software, it will ask you to enter an iLok ID. So you need to have an iLok ID, which you will see on the top of the screen here. It says, where is it? It's you have to create a free account. There it is, towards the top left. So you create a free account, which is a different account name and password to your Pro Tools one, but you need them both. You will always need them both, whether you have iLok Cloud or whether you have a physical iLok. So once you've downloaded iLok and opened the software, you will end up with something that looks like this. So you will find in your iLok account, mine says Pro Tools Ultimate Perpetual Bundle, but more likely if you've got regular Pro Tools, it'll just say Pro Tools Perpetual Bundle or something like that. And once you plug your iLok in to one of your USB ports, and you've registered it as a new iLok, which all the software will offer you to do, you then literally just drag where it says Pro Tool Perpetual Bundle on top of the bit on the left where it says iLok, and it'll copy the yes/no switch onto your iLok, and away you go. If you don't have a physical iLok, then you can click on the Pro Tools Perpetual Bundle, and then there's a little arrow towards the top of the screen there next to the X, and that enables the iCloud, the Cloud iLok. So many I's and clouds these days and locks. So that will enable your iLok in the cloud. Okay, so that's it. I'm afraid it's a few more boring bits to go, but it's really worth getting to grips with the very basic Pro Tools concepts of what a session should look like, and how to get going. So let's open and make a Pro Tools session. So Pro Tools session. So open Pro Tools. I've got one up here, which is a bit of a cheat. That's one of the ones while I was prepping for this. So let's close that one and I'll make a fresh one. Come on. Let's quit and start again. Oh, there we go. I thought it was going to crash for a minute. So let's open Pro Tools here. Yes, I've got the Flash one. Here we go. Any second now. So we'll make a new session. So when you open Pro Tools, it comes up blank and you just think, oh, what's going on here? Nothing's going on here. But it'll always just come up with the word Pro Tools in the top. So the first thing to do is make a new session. Now, amongst the boring things that we need to do, we need to choose the sample rate and the bit depth. If you're not familiar with audio sample rates and bit depths, the industry standard for most things is 48 kilohertz and 24-bit. Now, if you've got small hard drives and things like that, then feel free to drop down to 16-bit. And if you're doing music, I suppose you could go to 44.1 kilohertz. But I would that's going away really, 44.1 kilohertz. So generally a good starting point is 48 kilohertz, 16-bit minimum, 24-bit preferred. I'm not going to go into what those mean because there's a lot of graphs and science behind it. But basically it means that it samples the sound, so it checks the sound 48,000 times a second, 48,000 times a second. And so it enables a certain quality of audio recording. And 24-bit means that the range that you're allowed to have between the quieter sound and the louder sound is very much larger than you will ever need it. And it also means that if you record something at a very low volume and need to bring it up later, then you've got a bit of freedom to do that. So let's call this, Sonic Boom Audio Tutorial. Now, I've got a feeling I might have already called it this, but let's have a look. Let's see where I can create one of those. Yes, I've already done it. So let me call it 2 then, because I've been practicing and I've already done one, which we don't really want. So when you open Pro Tools for the first time, it looks quite daunting. Quite a lot of things come up and you just go, oh my God, what's all these numbers? So from a post-production point of view, you can get rid of most of this stuff. So what I would do is I choose minutes and seconds. If you're working to picture, then you can choose timecode as your main base. If you click on minutes and seconds up here, and then you click, there's a little, can you see this arrow here? There's a little arrow here. Click it, and you can get rid of all the things that you don't want. And I would recommend that things that you don't want are meter, which is a music thing, tempo, which is for music, timecode 2 and timecode, which are for working with TV and film stuff, and then bars and beats, which is obviously music as well. So that already simplifies the interface quite a lot. So what we need to do is we need to check before we bring anything in how we are hearing our audio. So if you're just starting out, I'm guessing that you probably don't have any audio interfaces or anything like that. And if you just want to plug into the output, the headphone output that comes with your computer, then that's probably the where most people will start. So to make sure that you're hearing it through the correct place, if you plug in your headphones to the headphone jack of your laptop or computer or whatever you've got, then you go to Setup, then Playback Engine, and then this is my audio interface, but you would want normally just a built-in output, which for me is iMac Pro speakers, but yours would be, I don't know, MacBook Pro speakers, or it often just says internal output or something like that. Now this is called the hardware buffer size. I'm not going to go into what this is good for, but if you're not recording, if you're just playing stuff back, set it as high as you can. 1024 is a good number. So that all that just means is that your session, if you've got a busy session, it's less likely to stutter and come to a juddering halt. It just stores more stuff in the background, ready to play out to you. It just keeps more stuff waiting in line. So one of the things to mention about Pro Tools while we're talking about computers is that particularly on Mac and to a degree on Windows as well, you have to be slightly careful that you've got a computer that matches the spec of the Pro Tools. And you can check this out. If you just type into Google Pro Tools compatibility, it will tell you which operating systems are compatible with which version of Pro Tools. If you're on a Mac, this tends to change more regularly than it does with Windows, because say Windows 10 has been around for a while, so you'll find that stuff is compatible with Windows for a bit longer. With Apple things, say for example in September when the new Monterey operating system comes out, you wouldn't expect to be able to use the current version of Pro Tools with that operating system for about 6 months, until Avid and Apple have worked together to make sure that everything's compatible. So if you're buying a Pro Tools system now, then you should probably be on a fairly recent operating system, say, I think probably Mojave, Big Sur, or was there one in between? There was one in between, can't remember. But basically anything from the last 3 years should work absolutely fine. Hopefully that's the worst of the boring bits out of the way. Let's get some audio into Pro Tools. So there's various ways of getting audio into Pro Tools. There's what I would call safe ways and what I would call dangerous ways. What I'm going to do is I'm going to do a few dangerous ways first, and I'm going to show you why they're dangerous and how to get around the problem. So what we're going to do today is, if I just show you the little project that we're going to do. So if I just bring up this. So many years ago, I went to stay with the Arbore people in Ethiopia with an actor, Julian Ryan-Tutt, who's there in the middle of the left-hand picture. I don't know if you know him. But we stayed with these people and we recorded their music and interviews with them about their way of life, because a big road was about to be put through their village, and their way of life, which they'd had for thousands of years, was about to come to an end. So we were probably the last people there before before their village was, it wasn't quite destroyed, but it went very close to their village. Yeah, anyway. So right towards the end of our stay with the people here, the guy in the tartan just to the right of the main picture there, he was the chief of the Arbore people. And he wanted to bless us on our onward journey. So we had an interview with him, and we met him, and he blessed us. And then the villagers came out and danced for us. So in terms of audio clips today, we're going to be making a very basic interview package with a couple of bits of sound from the village. So one of the sounds that's really stayed with me over the years is the sound of the clanking bangles that the women wore on their feet. They're like steel, and that you'll hear them in a minute. They really clank around and make a lovely sound. And then there was another time when the village surrounded us in a circle, and we stood in the middle and recorded them while they danced. The picture we've got here is in bright sunlight, but we did it at a new moon. So imagine it. We could see absolutely nothing. We couldn't see our hand in front of our faces. It was amazing. So anyway, that's the little package that we're going to be making today. And to do that, I've got a few bits of audio. So we've got an audio for the interview with the Arbore chief, who obviously didn't speak English, and even the translator didn't speak English. So we had to go through 2 levels of translation, which will make this edit quite interesting. And then we've got the music of the dancing and the music and the sound of the blessing that was at the end. And then I was going to record in a little voiceover just to give us a little something else to mix in. But I realised that the setup I've got for streaming, it was going to be tricky to record into Pro Tools at the same time as I was doing this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to import the audio in a way that's not a great idea. What you can do is, if I bring in the main interview here, you can theoretically just drag and drop the interview here. In it comes. And
how long you have been the chief?
And you can hear the audio there. So you can go around bringing in lots of audio in that drag and drop way, or the other way of doing it, if you prefer, and it takes a bit longer, is you can import audio. Import audio. And then you can just navigate it. So I think it's on this one here. Tutorial, let's bring in the blessing. I'm going to do it the wrong way. Add, open, and then you can either put it on a new track. Let's do one on a new track. And it pokes it on a brand new track. It makes a track for you. Or you can put it into the clip list, which I'll explain later. So let's have a look. Which one haven't we got? We haven't got that one. You can put that into the clip list. So, and then you will see in the clips, we have got all 3 clips, but with the last one, because we opted to put it into the clip list rather than straight onto a track, it doesn't, if you want it later or something, but not at the moment, you can bring it in without it messing up your timeline here. So just to show you that it's there, that's the other audio you see, if we wanted it. Now the problem with this, bringing it in this way, is that if you have this audio on a memory stick or on a removable drive, then I'm going to do something really naughty here, which you're not meant to do, but it'll show you. If you go either to another studio or you unplug your memory stick, then you'll get this. It didn't work because I've got my settings set too cautiously. It copied it. But what happens, we'll try it again, hang on. Let me, processing, yeah, I've got a copy there. So basically what happens is that you can lose all your audio, you just get blanks. So I've obviously got a setting deep in my things which make it all be safe, but basically I'm going to come to how to make it safe in the in a moment. But yeah, so if you end up with, if you just drag your audio in without doing something that I'm going to show you in a moment, then stuff can get lost very easily when you either unplug a memory stick or move to a different machine. So we've got these in the machine. Let me just bring them in again in what I consider to be a safe way. So I won't explain this at the moment. I'll come back to this in a second. Bum, 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 bum. Yeah, come on. It's just thinking about it. Oh, have we got a little crash? For a program that doesn't crash very often, it would crash now, wouldn't it? Is it just thinking about it? I'm just going to come out of that. Look at that. Doesn't like it. Okay, well, that's Pro Tools' reputation down the Swanee. Okay, let's see what's got there. Okay, so it's come up because it crashed and we didn't save it. It's come up as new, which is not bad actually, but let me just empty out some of the stuff. I'll tell you what, I don't want that one at all actually. And let's get rid of the audio. I'll show you about all that later. Ah, yes, well actually it did crash because it lost the hard drive. So it was just a delayed response. If I'd waited, it would have lost the audio. So actually it was just freaking out in a different way. So let's do what we did before and tidy up this interface. So we click on the little arrow here, get rid of the stuff we don't want. I recommend keeping markers. We'll come back to that later, and lose bars and beats. And then what we want to do is, I think what I'm going to do now is go into and set up a few things ready for working in a post-production kind of way. So just the preferences box here is really daunting and really horrible. But what I would say is if you just set up a couple of things, if you follow this, you will get the basics of it right, and you will you'll be good to go. So the edit window default length. So this is how long by default it expects your program to be. So I always just start by setting it to 10 hours because longer is better than shorter. There's nothing really wrong with setting it to be 10 hours because you're very unlikely to get beyond 10 hours, aren't you? I think, even if you put all your material in a row rather than stacked up. So I normally just set it to 10 hours, which is 10, and then you do all the zeros to make it move along. And then I go into the operations. I kind of leave that because that's more or less how it should be set. The one thing that I do tend to do is increase the number of backups, automatic backups that get made. So I say 99, which is the most it'll allow you, and it backs up every 5 minutes. It will make for a slightly larger session size, but at the risk of losing important stuff, you should be doing that, I think. I would leave the editing and mixing is all fine, and that I would leave this processing. This is the one that we want to come to. So the way to get round missing audio when you drag it in is to click here, automatically copy files on import. So then when you import the audio, it does put it into your audio files folder. It doesn't leave it on your removable media. There's one other thing I want to find here, which is, where is it? Oh yes, here we go. Back in the editing tab. If you're editing speech, I normally find that the best shape of crossfade is equal power. Now, not everybody agrees with me, and certainly for music, I think equal gain works better. But I think equal power is good because you don't get a little dip in the middle of the crossfade. So we'll maybe experiment with that later, and you can see what you think. But just as a default, it will just create that as the default setting. So that's horrible settings out of the way. So where am I here? Yes. Okay. Let's re-import the audio. Now, because I've been using Pro Tools for so long, I generally I have keystrokes for everything, and it's worth learning the keystrokes. So the way that you find out the keystrokes in the first place is when you go to importing audio. Import the audio. If you see here on a Mac, you get the Shift Command I. So that shows that if you type in Shift Command I, it comes up with the import audio window. So then I do blessing, dancing surrounded, interview, and the voiceover. And unless you specifically choose to add, if you specifically click add here, it won't copy it, but it is worth doing the convert button. So when you do convert, that will definitely bring it all in to your audio files folder. So you do that, and then there'll be a little bit of processing time. There it goes. Now, I normally keep stuff on the clip list to start with because I like to build it up bit by bit rather than having a whole pile of audio that starts at the very beginning of your timeline. So just press OK to that. And you can see here, over here on the right, we've got some clips. So just to help you with the navigation around the Pro Tools window, there are two windows in Pro Tools. It's probably easiest if I create a track or two, and then it'll help me explain all the little sections of it at once. Now, Pro Tools is quite fussy about mono and stereo tracks. It won't let you copy stereo audio onto a mono track, and it won't let you copy mono audio onto a stereo track. You would think that it would let you copy mono audio onto half a stereo track, but it doesn't. So to make a new track, for this session, I think I'm going to use one mono track and let's say two stereo tracks. So we do File. No, I normally do this with shortcuts. I do it without thinking. So here, Track and New, shortcuts, Shift, Command and N. Then you get this window up here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have one mono track, which will be for the voiceover. So I'm going to call that VO. And then I'm going to have two, so you just type two stereo tracks. And the type is an audio track. I'll explain this in just a second. I will call it, I won't name these here. I'll just call these audio because I'm going to give them different names. So the different types of tracks, there are different types of tracks. I'm not going to go into these probably at all today. For our purposes, you just need audio tracks. If we get time, I might show you an aux track as well, but I'm thinking that we probably won't get that far. Okay, so as we're set up at the moment, one mono audio track, where it says in samples, there is an option in ticks. Let's not go there. Ticks is for music, let's just say, and samples is for post-production. That's a general way of thinking of it. So once we're happy that we've got the right number of tracks we want, we can click Create. So it just looks like 3 tracks, doesn't it? Now, if you have to look quite closely, and you'll see that here, a mono track has got 1 bar graph, and a stereo track has got 2 bar graphs. So we've got 2 stereo tracks and 1 mono track. And the other way to make sure to see easily is that a mono voiceover track won't let you put it onto a stereo track here, but it will let you put it onto a mono track. And conversely, a stereo track will let you put it onto a stereo track, but it won't let you put it onto a mono track. Okay, so I'm a big fan of naming tracks. What you don't want to do when you're working with a lot of audio is have 100 tracks called Audio 1, Audio 2, etc. So it's good, at least for basics, to get your tracks named and to try and keep organized with your audio from a very early stage, because you are probably going to have to get good at naming stuff eventually, so it's worth getting into that habit straight away. So to rename a track here, you just double click. I will call this Interview. And then for this one, I'll double click it and call it Effects, even though one of them is going to be Music. Effects and Music, why not? Effects and Music, there you go. So now that we've got 3 tracks, I can show you around the interface a bit better. So we have got this main window here is called the edit window, this whole window here. And within the edit window, you can show and hide lots of different things. So if you want to create more space, you can hide the bits so you get as much waveform on screen as possible. And that's really good if you're working on a laptop or a small screen, then you can get as much space for your waveforms as you need. So the way that you reveal on this side the clips is there's like a line with is it a plus or an arrow? My eyes are terrible. Let's call it a plus. There's a little thing here. You click that and that shows and hides your clip list. This is called your clip list, hence the name clips here. If I move this down a bit. So, and then on the left-hand side, you've got a similar button here, which if you click, hides or reveals your group list, it's called. So these are your groups, and I will be coming to that fairly shortly because it's actually quite a useful section. Up here is a list of all your tracks that are in your session. If you don't want to see a track for any reason, you can click the button here and it will hide it. It doesn't delete it because you can get it all back. I would say unless you've got loads and loads of tracks, probably don't go there because you will suddenly find yourself going, where's this audio coming from? And you'll find that there's audio on a track that you've hidden and it will confuse you for ages and you will get very frustrated. So my initial thing is don't mess with this area too much. This area we will need shortly for a little trick that I've got. And here's all your list of audio clips. Now, if you want to hear an audio clip without putting it into the timeline, you can press Alt on a Mac, and it might be Start on Windows, or it might be Command. I didn't check this one. I think it's probably Start. So on a Mac anyway, Alt and click on the audio.
Yeah. Right. Will you right.
And you hear the audio coming through. So if you want to hear this one, click, Alt click, and then you have you can audition that clip. So right, let me just see where I'm. Yes, okay. Right, so let's get some audio in the timeline and actually do some editing. So interview with the Arbore chief. That's a stereo track, so it has to go on a stereo track. Now, initially, I'll be showing you these 3 tools here. So there's a tool called a grabber, which enables you to move things around. There's a tool called a scrubber, which enables you to highlight audio. Oh, that's a trim tool. What's the official name of that? Selector tool. Yes, it's a selector tool. And then on the left here, you have a thing called the trim tool. Now, I'm going to show you these, but what we're going to do is once I've shown you how these work, I'm going to click this button and then it'll bring them all together. But I think it's a good starting point to get used to the individual tools because you need a little bit more dexterity to work your way around what's called this multi-tool where all the tools are linked. So let's take this off the timeline again and I'll show you from very first principles. So if we want to edit this interview with the Arbore chief, you can click, drag it into the timeline, drag it sort of somewhere vaguely near the beginning. So what you would, if you want to move your audio around, as I've hinted already, the grabber literally grabs the track wherever you want and moves it around. It won't grab it, won't let you put it onto a mono track. If I go up, it doesn't do anything, but it lets you put it on stereo tracks wherever you want. So if you want to select some audio, if you know before you even start that this stuff is going to be rubbish, well, no, look, that looks like a click there. Let's get rid of the click. You can just press, you can select anywhere just by dragging across and pressing the delete button. Now that gets rid of the audio, but there's a problem and that leaves a hole. I'll be solving that in a second. Now the other thing is if you know that the interview starts, say here, it doesn't, but let's pretend it does, and you just know, I just want to chop this off. I just want to get to the beginning of the interview. It's called top and tailing in radio, where you chop the beginning off and chop the ending off. So use the trim tool, and that gives you a little bracket here. You literally click and drag. I was saying about there, wasn't I? I was saying that that's where we want to do it. So if you click and drag there, then that's what you get. Now you have to be quite careful, I've learned, with the trim tool, because it's very easy just to think that you're clicking somewhere and you actually get rid of audio. It's not gone forever, of course. You can always get it back. With digital audio, it's very unusual that once you take something off the screen, it disappears forever. There are some programs where they work that way, but that is not the case with Pro Tools. With Pro Tools, once it's in your system, it's pretty difficult to get rid of it without intentionally getting rid of it. So that is the basics of these tools. Now, let's go back to what I was just suggesting here about, I think this is a click, or let me do it. Yeah, there's a nasty click there. Sorry, I just realised I'm going to get my Zoom window back up because I'm not seeing any questions or anything like that. Good, we're all clear so far. So that is a nasty click, and I know that was my microphone before I had it fixed. So we want to remove that, but we don't want a gap in the middle. So if you just select it and get rid of it, then to play, you can, I didn't even tell you how to play, gosh. You can click, the space bar is play and stop. Gosh, that should have been part one, shouldn't it? The space bar is play and stop, everyone. So hit play. So obviously that's not what you want. You want to get rid of the click, but you don't want it to make a hole in your audio. So for these circumstances, we've got a little section here: shuffle, slip, spot, and grid. Now, for our purposes, you can forget spot and grid. Spot is when you are doing TV shows and you want to put your audio in a very specific time code position. And you will sometimes click on it by mistake, and you'll go to you'll go to put some audio in, and you'll get up this box. You go, I don't know what that box is. But basically, it's probably because you've accidentally gone into spot mode. And grid mode is to do with music, so it's to do with keeping music on the beat and this sort of thing. So for audio post-production purposes, we only use shuffle and slip. Yeah, I was going to say almost entirely, but I think we can safely say entirely. Now, shuffle and slip has a shortcut key, which I strongly suggest you use all the time, because you'll be using shuffle and slip like nobody's business. Shuffle is F1, slip is F2. Same on a Mac and a PC, both. Shuffle and slip. So, if you're in slip mode, what happens is that you have the freedom, so if we make this whole again, you have the freedom of slipping your audio with the grabber tool, slipping your audio wherever you want with great freedom. Shuffle mode doesn't give you that freedom, and I'll come to that in a minute. The problem with slip mode is that when you make edits, you end up with that, I'll just put this back, you end up with that problem of leaving a hole. If you do the same edit in shuffle mode, and then you delete, which is backspace, so press backspace, that gets rid of the audio, but it shuffles everything up. So if I put my cursor on that big waveform there, when you delete it, pressing the delete button, you can see that everything moves along to fill the hole. So the two basic building blocks of editing on Pro Tools is shuffle and slip. So at this point, I think I'm going to teach you about how to join these together. Now, this is the most complicated thing that I think we'll come to today. It's a bit of a mind bender. But once you've got it, you will have it forever. and you won't ever think about using these individual tools again. It is so useful that I think it's worth maybe even a day of mind bending to get your head around this. So with a selector, normally you can click anywhere in an audio clip and it still highlights it. With the grabber, you can click anywhere in an audio clip and it still selects it. And with the trim, and with the trim, you can click anywhere and it'll trim it in a quite frightening way sometimes. So what we're doing here is joining them together. The way that this works, I'll put this back into slip mode just because it gives us a bit more freedom, is that instead of you having freedom to put your pointing device, whether it be grabber, selector or trimmer, wherever you want, Pro Tools thinks, okay, well, if it's in the bottom half of a waveform, then it'll be the grabber. If it's in the top half of a waveform, it'll be the selector. And if it's on the edge of a waveform, in the middle, it'll be the trimmer. So I'm purposely at the moment not going to these bottom corners or top corners because that's another little thing which we'll come to in a minute. But basically, once you're in the multi-tool mode, if you think the bottom half is a grabber, the top half is a selector. So what that means is, without changing your tools, you can grab something, and as long as you're in slip, move it wherever you want, and then you can select something and press the delete key, and then you can continue moving your bits wherever you want, all without changing tool. And in fact, if you decide, well, I want that to go to there and that to go to there, then you can move these all around. So I'll be using the multi-tool from now on because I think that is the way to go. And this is a good point to show you. This will be a terrible edit, but if you're in slip mode, you would normally want to go, oh, well, that goes there, doesn't it? But it's very difficult to get it exactly where you want it to be because it'll either overlap slightly or there'll be a tiny gap and you'll get a dropout. So what's the cure for that? The cure for that is shuffle mode. So what shuffle does is it allows you to grab the audio, and as long as you hint it in the direction where it wants to go, that way or that way, it gives you a sort of preview of where it's going to end up. And what it does is it butts up exactly to the region boundary, as they call it, the edge of the previous clip. I'll show you how to zoom in a second, but if I zoom in, then you can see that however far we zoom in, it's absolutely perfectly in place. Right, zooming. Zooming is really, really essential. I must do thousands of zooms every day, as in, not zooms, zooming in with a scrubber and things like that. So zoom is command on a Mac, control on a PC, and then it's the square brackets. So the square left bracket makes you see things, makes you see more of your timeline, and the square closed bracket makes you zoom in, so you see less of your timeline, but you see more detail. And then, if you want to see these waveforms taller, then you can use up here, you've got zoom. Now, on some systems, these don't show. Now, you just go, where's my zoom stuff? And it's really unintuitive, but up here, there's a tiny little drop down. And if you click on it, it gives you access to all sorts of controls that you may or may not lead for your workflows. For example, if you don't do any music stuff, then you can get rid of all the MIDI stuff. I leave it there because I do little bits and bobs of music. So you just make sure if you haven't got it, then click on this window and make sure that zoom controls is ticked. And then you can click away and it goes away. So if you want to see this waveform looking bigger, you can go up, up, down, down. You can also, instead of using the command and square brackets, you can do your zooming that way as well. But I think it's really good to learn the shortcuts because you're using it so much. Okay, I'm running slightly long, so I have to get into the proper editing side of things now. So the next thing is I want to hear my edit, and I want to I want to hear what I'm going to be editing. So let's first of all find a little bit of audio, and we'll use the tools to work out what we want to cut, and we'll do some basic editing, and we'll do some what's called scrubbing of the audio so you can hear what's going to go on. So let's play the audio and find out where we want to start.
Yeah. Fine. Will you tell us a little bit about?
Okay, so if we want to start here, will you is there, isn't it? So you can use the zoom, command square bracket, and you can see that that's the word.
Will you?
So you play and stop being the spacebar again. But what I would like a little bit of a fade up on there. I'll do fade ups in a second, but at the moment I'm just going to give myself a bit of space so that I can have a fade up. So I want to make a very basic edit mark there. So I would do Command on a Mac, Control on a PC, and E for edit. Command E, edit. If these shortcuts aren't working for you, make sure that this button is clicked here. Sometimes it defaults up here. And there is a reason for that. They have different shortcuts, but I want to keep you in this mode here because it has a very useful function, which we'll come to in a bit. So once more, you do Command on a Mac, Control on a PC, and E for edit. Command E. There you go. And that's put an edit mark in there. So then you could just highlight. Bottom half of the waveform gives you the grabber to highlight something, and the delete key just gets rid of it. We're in slip mode, so the audio is going to stay where it is. If I did the same thing in shuffle mode, F1 to enable shuffle mode. If I do it in shuffle mode, it all scoots up. So if you want a very precise start point, then shuffle will be your friend. If you don't mind at this point, then you can use slip and it won't move the audio. The time when it matters is if you've got audio on a different track here, for example. If you imagine that's different audio, and you make an edit, Command E, then select with the bottom half to make the grabber tool. If you want to then do shuffle to delete that, you're going to come up with a little bit of a problem because it'll move up the audio on this track, but it doesn't do that track. And that's where our little section over here will come in any second now. So you do have to be a bit careful when you're shuffling stuff because it can move things out of sync. So let's park that idea of things moving out of sync for a second because we've got a bit more editing to do here first. So back into slip mode because I don't really want everything to move up. Select to highlight the bottom half of the track, press delete, and you're left with quite a bumpy in.
Will you tell us a little bit about how long you have been the chief?
Okay, well, we'll do that. So there's a couple of ums in there that we might want to get rid of. So the obvious way of doing it here is
tell us.
There's an there. So one way of doing it is with the selector tool. So it's the top half of the audio track here. You click and you can drag over. So that selects that piece of audio. And then, bearing in mind what's going to happen down here, you can go into shuffle mode and press delete.
Will you tell us a little bit about...
There's another there. So you can just highlight over that and delete again. Bearing in mind we're creating a hole over here, which we don't want. But that's a basic technique for doing that. And then you've got a very basic...
Tell us a little bit about how long you have been the chief.
I mean, it's not the world's best edit, but it's a basic select and delete edit here. So we want to do two things now. First of all, we want to tidy this edit a bit.
Tell us a little bit about...
So after it says tell us, there's like a sound.
Tell us.
Tiny, tiny thing. So we want to actually hear what that is, because if we just scrub over it like that, we don't hear it. And if we move the selector tool, it doesn't move. And if you're in slip mode, it moves in the way that you don't want to move. You just want to be able to move your cursor over the top and hear it. So let's zoom in using the Command on a Mac, Control on a PC, close brackets. So then, if you want to scrub, so it'll sound like this. So it enables you to scrub through the audio. So the way that you do this on a Mac is you hold down the Control key, and on a PC you hold down the Start key. And when you're in the multifunction tool mode, you put your cursor in the top half here, hold down Control, and you can see that your cursor becomes a little speaker. And you can click and drag. Can you hear that? There's a little on the end there. So you find where you want. You say, okay, that's where I want that to be. And then you can do Command on a Mac, Control on a PC, and E to make an edit. And then you can delete it. So we would want to delete it and move everything up. So what would we do? We'd press Shuffle, and everything on that track would move up. So now we've got a slightly tidied edit here.
Can you tell us a little bit about...
So that's slightly better. There's still another bit hanging over, but we'll let that be. So now, sometimes to smooth the edit, what you want to do is put little crossfades between. So the next stage with the multi-tool is when you're on a region boundary, and this is called a region boundary. Every time that you have an edit mark, including the top or tail of an audio track, you have an edit boundary. And when you're near an edit boundary, you get, when you're towards the top of a clip, the physical representation of the top of a clip, up in the top half here, you have the trimmer tool when you're in the middle, but if you're at the top, you have this picture of a fade, and you can literally click with the mouse and drag and let go, and it creates a fade. So then, if you come back, click and press spacebar.
Will you tell us a little bit about...
So that still sounds a little bit abrupt in. So that's a general, what's called a linear fade. If you want to adjust the fade, if you're in the right place here, you wait until you have the picture of the little triangular thing here in the middle, icon. You click and then you can drag, and you can actually change the shape of the fade, either for a more gradual in or for a steeper in. I think for this we want a more gradual in. So that becomes that. You click behind and...
Will you tell us a little bit?
I think that's slightly better. So to take that one stage further, you then have, at this region boundary, you can, I mean, if it was the end of a clip, you could do a fade out by just dragging, but you don't want to do that for this reason.
Tell us a little.
You see what I mean? You get the atmosphere dips out, and then you get a hard click coming back in. So you want to do a crossfade. So then a crossfade, you go to the bottom here, the bottom of the representation of the clip, and you click and you drag to the left. I think you can drag either way. I got into the habit of dragging left, and that creates a crossfade. So what that does is it smooths the transition between the outgoing clip and the incoming clip. So that might sound a bit better.
Tell us a little bit about how...
To be honest, it wasn't a bad edit in the first place, so it doesn't sound an awful lot better, but hey, it's no worse, is it? And I think it might be a tiny bit better. Now you can see that this is a curvy shape. It's that equal power thing that we put in our preferences. I'm not going to change it to equal gain, but if you want to go into your preferences and then try that out, you can do equal gain and try a different setting. What you can do is if it doesn't work, you can select it, and then you can do either Command on a Mac, Control on a PC, F, and you can change the shape of fade there if you want. Why not? I'll just play it through for this.
Tell us a little.
Yeah, you can't even hear the dip there, so that's actually fine. It works either way. So, just to recap slightly, we've got basic editing using Command or Control E. We've got a multi-tool where we can select, we can move audio around, we can put fades on the beginning, or it also works on the end of clips using the same thing, click and drag. We have got we can tidy the edits with crossfades. So that's all fine as long as you're on one track. But like I've alluded to a moment ago, we get into real problems when we've got things on different tracks and everything's going out of sync. Because by default, when you make an edit, it does it just on the one track, whether that's a mono track or a stereo track. So the easiest way to do it, but not the best way to do it, is to click here under groups where it says all. It groups the tracks together. So whatever you do, it does it to all the different tracks. So now, I'll show you how to do markers in a minute, but if I put a marker here, then if I do an edit, I'll tell you what, yeah, if I do an edit here, you will notice that not only does this section move up here, but this section will move up by the same amount, maintaining this gap here. So I'm in shuffle, so it'll move up, everything moves, and it leaves the same gap between. So if I was to do that in slip, you just end up with a hole. So the reason it's not a good idea is that, well, I mean, it's a fine idea, but the reason why, how we can improve on it is that you very often want to be working just on one piece of audio and then on the whole thing. And you find, that you're going between clicking on the all button an awful lot of the time. So you go back and forth. So a way of optimizing whether you are working across one track or across all tracks is to create a group. Now, quite a lot of editing software assumes everything is a group all the time. And that is handy at a beginning level, but it gets a bit tricky later on. So Pro Tools, historically being for an advanced crowd or for a lot of pros, gives you a lot of flexibility, which can make for quite a learning curve when you start. But if we imagine that we want to do the equivalent to this all function here, but we want to have a bit more control over it, what we can do is click on, say, the bottom or the top track, and then just select all the tracks you've got here. So that highlights all the tracks. It might be handy. I wonder actually if I take these off, does it do the same thing? No, it doesn't. Because I want these all to be selected. So by default, it's quite good to have these buttons pressed in Pro Tools. The wording is terrible. It took me years to figure out what it actually means. So let's not bother with what it actually means. You will see that at this point, when I highlight all the tracks, they don't all get highlighted. But if I press these buttons, they do all get highlighted. So, excuse me, I'm just going to mute for a second. So you find that with these, it just will make your life a bit easier. So we highlight by clicking the top half of a track, selecting all the tracks, and then we can make a new group. Now, I always do this by doing Command G, Control G on a PC. I'm not even sure what the shortcut is, but let's just do Command G. That'll ask if we want to make a group, create a group. So this is a group that is designed to help us with editing. There's a reason for not doing mix edit. I'll probably won't get to that, but anyway. So you choose edit, and I just normally call it edit, just so that we know. I normally give it a capital E, so let's just do that. And then let's choose A, and I will show you almost immediately why we're choosing A. And press OK. So as long as you've got this button here pressed, this A to Z button, what happens is that every time you press the A key, you go between selecting individual tracks and the whole lot of tracks. So A, individual, A, everything, A, individual, A, everything. So it's the same as basically pressing the all button on and off and on and off, but it's a shortcut. So you can just do it with a finger control rather than by actually having to click on the group all the time. So I think what I'm going to do now is I'm going to put these bits together, and we're going to start from scratch, and we'll do a little bit of editing, and we're going to make a program. So if you see what I did there, the program was I'd done all my bits of editing on it, which I didn't want. So I just got the trimmer tool and pulled it all the way back out to the bottom. So what I'm going to do now is put the program at the very beginning at 0 seconds, which you can do by clicking the bottom half, dragging it. It's off the screen there, it's just moved up. And because I want this to be on the interview track, we go to interview here. So let's find the first words again.
Right. Will you tell us a little?
Okay, so we want to have that atmosphere come up here again. So once again, rough click there and put an edit mark in. Now, if we want this to end up back at 0 time, what do we need to do? Well, if you do it in slip, it's not going to have the desired effect. If you do it in slip, it's not going to work. But if you want your interview to start at 0 seconds, the cursor's at 0 seconds at the moment, there. If you want the interview to start at 0 seconds, you press F1, which is shuffle, and then you can press the delete button. Everything shuffles up and still starts at 0 seconds. Now, if you remember, if we want to put a crossfade on the beginning, I'm going to zoom in. Any ideas how we zoom in? Yeah, we do Command or Control on PC and close bracket, close square bracket. So zoom, zoom, zoom. Or if you don't want to do that, you can use these buttons here. But hey, get with it. Get with the shortcuts. It'll do you good. And then to make a crossfade, we use the multi-tool, and the part of the multi-tool we use, you can just go through until you find it. No, it's not the grabber. No, it's not the trim tool. It's not the selector tool. It's not the trim tool. You go to the top. Yes, you get the fader tool. So you click and just drag it where you want it, because that's going to be the first word, isn't it? And then, as we remember, we didn't quite like the shape of the fade here. So you click until you get the change in the icon. Click and then drag it to the shape you want it. And then you can click. And if you wanted to start at the very beginning of the whole timeline, you press return. That takes you to the top.
Will you tell us a little bit about?
Okay. So we're not going to hear much of a program at the moment, are we? So I'm going to try and zip through. I will just do a few little rough edits to get us to where we want to be. And you'll see how I do this as we go. So we go.
Tell us.
So we want to remove that So we, in shuffle mode, highlight and delete.
A little bit about.
And we lose that there as well. Using the selector part of the tool at the top half and delete. I'm just going to put a few crossfades in. Bottom half of the window, you get the crossfade. Click and drag either to the left or right. Click, drag either to the left or right.
Tell us a little bit about how long you have been the chief and.
Let's just finish on chief.
Been the chief.
Okay. Oh, it's gone back to the beginning.
The chief.
Aha, this is a good thing. So what we need here is, it doesn't really matter. It depends what you like, what your style is. But I always like my playback to start from where I press the stop button. Now, in a music sense, very often
Long you have been the chief.
You want it to start from the same place. But in audio post-production,
And what? And
you would normally want it to pick up from where you left off. So there's this extra button here, insertion follows playback. Now, again, Pro Tools naming structures, it got into my head eventually what insertion follows playback means, but it's a bit of a mind bender. So click the button and you'll find that when you press stop, the cursor stops in the place where you stopped it.
long you have been the chief. And what role?
Now, one thing that can mess you up here is sometimes you can have a pre-roll. Now, a pre-roll is, we don't really need to get into what exactly that is. I'm just trying to work out how to turn it off. Can't blooming see the pre-roll now. But anyway, if it's a problem and it's on, you can turn it off If it's a problem, then it'll be ticked there. And you just want to turn it off. Pre-roll. And what pre-roll does is it means it always starts a couple of seconds before you want it to start, basically. So it can be a bit of a pain. So if you've got insertion follows playback pressed and it's still not starting in the right point, then almost certainly your problem is pre-roll, pre-post roll. So anyway, let's get cracking. Let's get some audio in here. So I'll just edit this fairly quickly to get to the answer from the chief.
You have been the chief, and
So we'll finish there because we had enough there. And now I've got to find where the chief starts talking. So now we zoom out using the command or control and the left square brackets to try and find the chief speaking. Now I have to be a bit careful because there's two layers of translation going on here. So that now I'm not entirely sure, but I think at that point they're discussing what they should do as the answer. But let's just say that this is the answer. Okay, let's assume that's the answer. My arbore is non-existent, so we just want to take this chunk and move it up. So we can make a Command or Control E to make an edit. This whole chunk in the middle is now superfluous. We don't need that. So we can select it using the grabber tool, so the bottom half, and then because we're in shuffle, we can just press delete and it all moves up. So your screen, if you zoom in, will always zoom around your where your cursor is. So you can zoom into the cursor.
the chief,
So let's put a crossfade in there, bottom half, and crossfade it down like that. There we go.
the chief,
Not too bad. So let's assume that's the end of his answer. So now what we want to find... Oh, in fact, I'm not going to do it this way. I'm going to get clever. Let's get rid of the crossfade there. And let's put it on another track because we're going to dip him and have the English translation coming over the top. Let's find the English translation.
Karnata, which is the culture.
Here we go.
My role is, my role is.
So that's where we want it to be. So we'll do a rough edit here. So click in the top half. So that moves your, it's called the insertion point, to where you want it. You can do Command or Control E to make the edit. And then zoom out so you can see more of the screen. You can grab with the grabber here. That selects the audio that you're going to do something with. Then you can shuffle, boink, and it all moves up. So what we've got is we've got Julian's question, interview in the Arbore language, and then the English translation. But of course we don't want them to be totally one after the other. We'll want it to dip down and the translation and the English translation to come in after a few words. So you can literally click and just drag it. Let's just, for the sake of argument, put it here. Now, I will come to making this sound pretty in a bit, but just in terms of the timing of it all, let's hear what we've got.
tell us a little bit about how long you have been the chief.
My role is Karnata, which is the cultural chief of the Arbore community.
So then that'll go.
After
He's not.
I passed the younghood and then become hair, which is the next step, and I was selected to be Karnata, which is the cultural chief of the community.
Okay, let's finish there. So again, you can click in the top half, Command or Control E to edit, and we want that to be the end of the question. Now, of course, you could go on doing this all through the interview, but we're not going to do that because we don't have time for all that. So what we want to do now is we want to make it all nice and colourful. So let's we want to add a bit of the blessing, which would normally go right at the very end of the interview. So you go into your clips list and you just click on it and you can drag it onto whichever track you want apart from the mono track because it's a stereo audio file. You can tell it's stereo because mono audio files don't have this little triangle here. The triangle, if you click it, will show you the left channel, so dot left and dot right. It's usually a pain to show them all, but so if you've got a mono track, it doesn't have the little arrow by it. So the voice over here won't, as I've shown you, go onto the stereo tracks, it'll only go onto the mono tracks. But for now, we've got the blessing coming as well. So let's, what I want to do, I'm trying to get to a point where I can show you a certain thing. Let's put the blessing roughly in place, and then I can show you a little bit about navigating between your edits. So if we put the blessing, where do we want this? Zoom, zoom, zoom. Yeah, there's a beat that happens here. You can tell because it's got a big transient. So you can use a grabber and you can put it roughly in the right place. So what we'll find is that, I mean, this is ridiculously compressed in time, obviously, but we'll have the question, the answer in the Arbore language, the answer in the English language, and the blessing coming up, and then we'll mix that all together. But what I want to show you here is ways of navigating around with your insertion point, your selector, because quite often you just want to go to the nearest edit, and if you click here or here, you know, you're not exactly at the edit point. You want to be absolutely bang on that line just to see what you've got. So in Pro Tools, tab is your friend. So let's find something with the top track has got quite a few edits in it. So if I go press return, always takes you to the top of the whole program. If I press tab, let's zoom in a bit so you can see what's going on here. If I press tab, it'll take you from edit point to edit point to edit point. Now, I think either side of these is probably counts as an edit point. So let's see if I go tab. It's probably got tab to transients on, which I don't want. Yes, this is tab to transients is a thing that gets used in music. And what that does is as soon as it hears, it's designed for things like a drum hit, it will move the tab to that line. So that should be off. So start again. Tab takes you to the edit. Tab takes you to the next edit. And that takes you to the other side of the edit. It's still considered to be an edit mark. So you can press tab, 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 and it takes you edit to edit forwards in the program. Now, if you want to go backwards, then you need to do the universal button in Pro Tools for reversing an operation. Well, universal is a bit strong, actually. But the standard, we say the standard button for reversing an operation is Alt. So Alt on a Mac, and it's on a PC, I've written it down. You would Control Tab to go back on a PC. So I'm on a Mac, so I'm going to do Alt Tab, takes me back one. Alt Tab, takes me back one again. Alt Tab, takes me back one. If I'm on a PC, Control Tab, Control Tab, Control Tab, Control Tab. Takes me back to the beginning. And if you're in the mode where you're across all tracks, either by having all or edit on, it includes any edits you might have in all the tracks. So if I just make edit marks there, and you tab through, it takes them all into account. If you're not in the mode where you're working across all tracks, it works on the track that you've selected, that you're working on here. So sometimes you will want to tab between different things and select them as you go. So I don't want to keep this, but for now, if I wanted to, if I had a few things here that I wanted to get rid of, for example, you would go tab, 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 and then if you want to select this whole clip, well, if it's just one clip, you can just click with the grabber, so that would do it. But assuming you want to click across both clips here, you would go tab, and then if you press the shift button, it remembers where your cursor is here and highlights to wherever you go next. So if you go tab, it highlights to the next one. If you go tab, it highlights to the next one again. Conversely, if you want to do the reversing action, now this is a bit of a mind bender as well, you want to do the shift and tab to highlight backwards, but of course it's backwards, it's the alternative. So you want to do alt tab or control tab on a PC. Alt tab takes you back, holding down alt and shift, because shift keeps it highlighted. Keep going back and back and back and back and back. And so that way you can select whole groups of things and either delete them or do whatever you want with them. But that's just a good way of knowing how to navigate by tabs. That takes you exactly to a region boundary. Okay, so what am I doing here? Adding extra tracks, done that. Right, so we're kind of getting there now, actually. So what we need to do now is introduce the concept of basic mixing. So I will bring this other window, which might have been behind your main window if you've got Pro Tools. This is called the mix window. So the mix window here is the companion window. Do you remember at the beginning I said that Pro Tools has got two main windows? So there's the edit window and the mix window. And you can always toggle between the two of them because sometimes one takes up the whole space. So if for example, I had this taking up the whole space full of tracks, if I wanted to get to the mix window, on a Mac it's Command, and on PC Control again, Command equals brings the other window to the front. So basically if you go Command equals, you can toggle between the two. But we don't need to take up all that space for now. So there's that. Right. So what we're going to do is I'm going to show you a way of doing it that's not quite right for starters. And then we're going to make it correct. So here, this transition, if you remember, we originally put crossfade in there and then I moved it onto a different track. So what we actually want to do is, let's listen to it.
You have been the chief.
It's actually not too bad. There is a tiny click on there. But what I might do, just for the sake of argument, is do my little thing, put a little fade on that end, a little fade on that end, and then I can maybe even click and drag it so that the crossfades kind of line up.
How long you have been the chief?
My role is Karnata, which is
So you see that, of course, they're talking over the top now, and one is much louder than the other. So what we want to do is we want to fade down. So if I just show you vaguely how it should be, but slightly wrong, here it is fading down. You can drag with the mouse on the fader.
Karnata, which is the cultural chief of the Arbore community.
So, hey, that sounds great. But the problem is that when you come to play it back, it all goes quiet because this fader, you've basically shut the fader and it hasn't remembered what level it was at the beginning. So what we need to do is program the fader to do the fader moves for us. So if I want to just put this fader back to zero stop, as it's called, normal level, you can alt click on the fader and it'll put it back to where it wants to be. And the way that you get the faders to remember your mix is that you change this from read, where it just reads what previously has been written onto the track. And I generally put things into latch. And what latch does, I'll show you in a second. So if I put these all into latch, so it means that nothing changes until you touch the fader. And then when you touch the fader, from that point on, it remembers what the fader movement is. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to hit play, fade down at the right point, and then stop it about here. And you will see the fader jump back up because that's the point at which it returns. We haven't written any new information, so it'll return to what was originally its level. So I'm just making a check here. Yep, I'll come to that in a bit. So here we go. I'm just going to hit play.
How long you have been the chief?
Click on it, so it's writing. Dip.
My role is Karnata, which is the cultural chief of the Arbore community. After
stop. So what we should find now is that the fader drops down to nothing. And this is where we stop writing information. So that all the previous information from that point that was there before should still be exactly the same. So let's watch it on the fader and see what the fader does. Mainly just watching the fader at this point.
my role is Karnata, which is the cultural chief of the Erbori community.
And it'll jump up.
After I passed
There. So that's the point where we hit stop. So that's all well and good, but you might want to actually see what that fader movement looks like. So apart from the waveform selectors here, there's a few other things that you can choose. Now, I would say for now, you just need the volume ones. So if you look at the volume, that shows you the movements that I actually made on the fader there. So that enables us to modify them if we decide, oh, that was a little bit loud there. We can just pull it down or pull it up there or whatever we want to do. But that'll be fine. And even if we want to just smooth the way that the fader comes back up, it doesn't make any difference, but just for aesthetic purposes, you can watch the fader link into the audio, this rubber banding, isn't it? It's the symbolism here. So here we go.
my role is Karnata, which is the cultural chief of the Erbori community.
And then it'll glide back up.
I passed.
So it glided back up rather than coming up suddenly because we put in that glide in here. So just because I can't bear it, I'm just going to put a little fade on there because it clicks on the way in. But that's just, again, one of the nice easy ways that you can do it when you use the multi-tool. So we're getting there, aren't we? So we've got the basics here. So let's do the same on this end. I'll tell you what, I'll keep this showing so you can see it as I write it. So I want this music to start silently and come up underneath him. And because we've got the beat there, that should match nicely. Let's actually find at the end of his words. So you click in the top half selector here.
To be Karnata, which is the cultural chief of the community.
Cultural chief of the community is there. So what we can do here is we go, this is where I want to put a marker, because I mentioned markers earlier. So if you've got a big keyboard, which has got separate enter and return keys, then you just double press the enter key. If you're on a laptop, on a Mac, you need to have the function key. So there's a function key, which has got like a line with an upward arrow on it as well, function. I can't describe it any other way, but you need to do function and return. That's the best I can do, I'm afraid. That's what the function button is. But if you're on an extended keyboard, then there's a separate enter key than return. And that will put a marker in. And if you don't want the marker, then you can literally just drag it out and it goes to the bin. But we want the marker back there. So let's mix in this bit of music here. Okay, here we go.
So I passed
I'll fade it to 0 to start with.
young hood and then become hair, which is the next step.
Fade it
I
up.
was selected to be Karnata, which is the cultural chief of the community.
Actually, what I've done there is I've brought in the prayer. I think it might be nice to have the music. So I select it. I'm going to delete it from there. Then come back into the clips and drag it there instead. Now I know that that's where it gets going. You can tell it gets going there. So let's select, delete, bung it roughly where it is. It'll be fine. And we'll see how we go. So down to, fader's already down because if you remember, we wrote the information down there. So let's start from where it's already down.
Hood and then become hair, which is the next step. And I was selected to be Karnata, which is the cultural chief of the community.
Then we'll fade it out. Cool, so that's that. So now that that's faded out, what you want to do is make sure that you don't end up with it reappearing where you don't want it. So you can click in the bit where the fader is all the way down, go back to the waveform. You can make an edit, Command or Control E, select bottom half with a grabber and press delete. And there you have it. So that's the kind of that's the very basics of doing a really basic mix. So you can go through your program doing all that sort of stuff, and eventually you'll end up with a whole program with lots of layers and lots of nice sounds and everything like that. So once you've done that, you need to get it out of your program. Sorry, you need to get it out of Pro Tools and into the world. So I'm just going to get rid of that marker because I don't need it. So this is called bouncing. It's the history of the word I won't get into now, but it's basically about a way of getting your audio out of the Pro Tools. So if you've got a mix that you know ends here and begins at the beginning, you can highlight to the beginning of the whole program, which, if you remember, Shift remembers where your cursor is, and then you can either Alt-Tab back to the beginning, or the easier way of doing it is you can put your cursor at the end of the program, hit Shift, and then if you remember, Return always takes you to the beginning of the program. So you can hold down Shift and press Return, and that highlights the whole length of the program. And that will export, as long as your clip is on the last, as long as your out point here is on the last clip of the program, this will all work fine. So then you need to bounce it. So the command is bounce to disk, which is, they've changed the name. This shows how often I use the menu command. Bounce mix. So let's do that. So it comes up with a daunting window here. But basically, if you work your way through it, it's not too bad. So let's call it Arbore. That bit's easy enough. File type BWF, which is a broadcast wave format. Now, WAV and AIFF are the standard broadcast quality audio files, and I'd always recommend doing that before you do MP3s or anything like that. So you can always make MP3s from WAVs, but if you make a WAV from an MP3, you won't get the quality back. So it's always best for your master to be a WAV or an AIF. So if you always select WAV there for starters. Now, mix source, leave as it is, unless you've got anything wacky there. As long as analog 1 and 2 here is, it says output 1 and 2. Is that going to be a problem? Physical output, analog 1 and 2. Yeah, it's just because I named my things slightly differently. It will work. It's some complicated stuff that I'm not going to get into. And then file format interleave. Now, the very old Pro Tools system used to output one left channel and one right channel as 2 files, but nobody does that anymore. So you want interleaved always, unless your whole program is mono, in which case you can choose mono summed, up to you really. And I would choose 24-bit 48 kilohertz as your master file. You can create MP3s from that afterwards at whatever quality you want, but that's a good master file quality. Don't worry about this pad to frame boundary. That's about compatibility with TV edit suites and that sort of stuff. Import after bounce, don't have to worry either way about that. I would tend to leave that off. What import after bounce means that once you've copied it, you get a copy in your clip list here. There are reasons for doing that and there are reasons for not doing that, but it doesn't really matter, but I would tend to not do that because if I'm putting an audio file on my desktop, for example, it's outside of my session folder, so therefore I don't consider it to be safe audio. So if I take off import after bounce, and then I can choose where I want it. So if I choose a directory, if I put it onto my desktop, which I know is naughty, but there we go, desktop, open. Now this line here, when you buy Pro Tools for the first time, offline will not be ticked, and you'll have to do everything in real time. So this would take 46.9 seconds to copy, which is unnecessary. So if you just make sure you click the offline, that means it does it faster than real time. And then, while I'm here, if you want to add an MP3 as well, you can just click the button. Let's do that just to show you the process of it. Well, that will create a WAV and an MP3. Okay, so we're ready. Let's do bounce. So because we've asked for an MP3, it asks for the quality of the MP3. So we've set the quality of the WAV here. Now it's asking for the quality of the MP3. I would say minimum 128 for stereo. That's good. and the slowest encoding speed, because the difference between fastest and slowest is minimal and you get better quality. So let's just say OK to that. And it's done it. So there you have it. You have a program. Now, well, you may not hear this.
Will you tell us a little?
No, I don't think you can hear that, because my outputs, my desktop outputs, are different to what I'm feeding down to the stream. Okay, so we've got a question here. Let me just finish up here, because I've finished up pretty much everything else. So I will just show you that it works just by doing the naughty drag. There you go. So there's our mix in there. So I'll undo that. Good. Right. So that's the tutorial bit mainly done. Somebody's asking here, what are the main benefits of using Pro Tools over Audition? It's been a while since I've used Audition, but one of the things that Pro Tools is a lot better at is it's basically the shuffle and slip stuff. Shuffle mode is a lot more intuitive in Pro Tools, I find. Audition, you have to be slightly careful unless they've changed it. Forgive me, I think I last used Audition about 5-7 years ago, something like that, so quite a long time ago. And there were two modes of using Audition back then. I'm assuming it's the same now. There was a multi-track mode and a single-track mode. And the single-track mode actually had destructive editing, so I would generally avoid that, because you were at risk of losing audio or throwing away audio. But the multi-track mode is okay. The audio scrubbing is nowhere near as good as Pro Tools. It's all just a little bit more basic. The plugins are slightly more difficult to use. I suppose once you get used to them, it's okay. I just find it a bit more clunky. Is the answer? Pro Tools, it's their main business. You know, they do Avid, the editing system, and they do the audio system. So all their eggs are in that particular basket. Whereas with Audition, of course, it's Adobe, so it's one of their suites in their in their Creative Cloud. So they have additional tools like denoising and things like that, but I don't think their denoising stuff is very good. So I don't think that's a great selling point. One other thing that I did mean to teach you about before we finish, and if there's any other questions, now might be a good time while I just show you this. On Pro Tools, of course, like in all editing software, you have the ability to add EQs and compression and things like that. Now, I'm kind of guessing that most people will have some idea of what EQ means and what compression means. So, for example, here.
After I passed the...
So if we imagine that we wanted a little bit more bass end in this one here. So this is on the track called Effects and Music. So if we go to Effects and Music here, you can insert, this section is inserting here, you can insert a multi-channel because it's stereo, EQ, and I've got more here than is standard, but the standard Pro Tools one is EQ 7 band. So then everything that's on this channel will have EQ on it. So for example, if I now click here in this channel, and if I want to remove some of the top end, you can muffle it down. So, I mean, that sounds ridiculous, but it gives you the idea that these are EQs that you can put in a channel and make them work. So if I take that out again. And the same with a compressor. Now, I'm imagining that you've got the basics of how compressors work. Dynamics compressor, if I use a Pro compressor. So that, again, that's on the channel. So everything that's on this channel will get compression. Oh, this is leading to a good point accidentally here, which I meant to mention but forgot. So compressor. So these things here. So if I make it quite strong, you'll see it's, if I make it really vicious, it's really taking the level down quite viciously there. So one thing that I really wanted to mention but totally forgot is about clip gain. So if you imagine that this recording comes in and it's way too quiet, rather than have to do everything on a fader, because with a fader it does get a bit fiddly. If you just want to get the basic level of something right, I'm just going to get rid of this compressor because it's not going to help with my point here. This little knobble here with at the moment it says -15 on it, enables you to change this block, its whole entire level, before it hits the mixer, before it hits the EQ, before it hits any compressors or anything like that. So it's just like a coarse gain control. So just by moving that fader, you can get a really rough idea of the sort of level you want. So that's worth knowing. And if you've got multiple, I'm not going to go there, it gets difficult. But basically just to know that this is called clip gain, and it enables you to set a master level for each of your clips. It's probably quite a good idea to do that before you edit it too much, or you'll end up having to change the clip gain on all of these, which is not hard. It's a shortcut, but it varies between Mac and PC. I'm not sure what the PC one is, but on a Mac with a standard mouse, you can highlight across, and this is finger memory rather than anything, Shift and Control, I think, and then you just swipe up on your trackpad or mouse, and it changes the whole lot up or down. It sometimes has a bit of a delayed response. Okay. Main benefits. Okay. So, right. Recommend a simple control surface for use with Pro Tools. Yes, I use a control surface. I have done for years, and they are great. So there's two basic types of control surface that are compatible with Pro Tools. And it does get a bit nerdy. So the basic two are called Yukon and Hui, H-U-I. So Yukon are surfaces that are generally made by Avid or people with close ties to Avid, and they have extra goodies in them. So you can have more complicated names in the naming strips, and you can have more controls of the knobs and all that sort of thing. Hui is quite an old system, but it's much more compatible with different control surfaces. So in terms of Avid Yukon control surfaces, which are very posh and nice, but a bit at the expensive end, the Avid S1 is the standard starting point, and it is really, really good. It's a third of the price of the one that I've got, which is an Avid S3. The S1's about £1,000, by the way. It's about a third of the price of the Avid S3, but it's better than mine. It's just newer and better. So if that's a bit rich for your blood, and I wouldn't blame you if it was at all, I think Presonus make really good ones. I think SSL make good ones, but they're likely to be expensive again. I would probably not buy a second-hand control surface, because after a while the faders go. I've had my S3 for about 7 years, and I think I've replaced all the faders on it, and they're hard to come by, they're expensive to repair, so I would say that you're probably best off buying a new control surface of whatever type you can afford. A good resource is Pro Tools Expert, which is also productionexpert.com. If you search control surfaces there, they will give you good rundowns. They're really great. I occasionally write articles for them, but they're unbiased and really good place to look. So I'm just going to mute for a second. Got that tickly cough coming back. Okay, well, I think that if there's no more questions, I'm kind of done with as far as I think I can go now. I'm well aware I've probably blown all your heads and spoken far too much. Is there anything else? Any further questions? I think I'll hang on here until I hear other words. I'll hang on for a minute. Okay, so we seem to be out of questions, which is all good. Sorry for blowing your minds, but Pro Tools is a complicated startup point, but it's pretty good once you get used to it. And the great thing is that once you've mastered Pro Tools, you can go into pretty much any studio in the world, because studios have lots of different systems. They'll have Logic, they'll have Reaper, they'll have Audition, they'll have whatever they have, but they will always have Pro Tools as well, unless it's very unusual. So thanks for everything. And yeah, I hope this was of